The desert. Theron never saw it coming. All of a sudden, a young woman leapt out from the crowd of mercenaries and launched herself straight at him. The master assassin would have protected himself properly had it not been for the words she uttered when she raced at him. She screamed his name, or at least the name he had once been known for amongst the assassins and the wolf hunters in Valcrest. The name had faded with time and been replaced with names and titles such as Commander Lockwood, General Lockwood, Master, Assassino, etc. There were too many names and titles to ever be spoken, but none of them would ever take away his real name, the name only the people closest to him knew. Theron turned towards the rushing girl just as she launched herself on to him and gave him a hard hug. It was the second hug in his entire life. It might sound pathetic, but he's been far too busy with other things and matters to be able to focus on such things. His first hug was given to him by Sarah, the former leader of the wolf hunters, on the day he killed his first assassin. Theron always wondered why he was favored more by Sarah, but these days he could guess himself to the obvious answer. She felt a connection to that 16-year-old boy who had lost everything he held dear and had nothing to live, die, or fight for but the sweet thought of revenge, just like her. After the conversation died down and the leader left to find Crystal, the woman who had just hugged him led him towards a large temple. Her name was Allison, and she was one of the few people Theron could trust. He had seen much betrayal in his time away, and he chose carefully who he would share information with and who he would slit the throat of for listening to his words. Allison led him into a large room filled with debris and things alike. They were either trying to repair the place, or they had recently had a party of some sort. Theron guessed on the latter. And there they remained, waiting for Crystal and their mercenary leader to come back. Theron didn't plan to speak with the leader about his plans. Those would be reserved to him and his companions, and maybe to his old friends. But he still didn't know if he could trust them. While Allison took a seat on one of the rocks, he remained standing because he wasn't about to make things comfortable for himself just yet. He started to explain that he was sorry for missing him that morning, 4 years ago, when she fell in a hurry to the healers and missed his departure. Theron smiled vaguely behind his mask as he studied Allison. He had obviously grown, and she had changed somehow. Maybe not as much and as drastically as himself, but still changed nonetheless. She seemed a bit more experienced, or at least as experienced as one could be at such a young age. I restrained myself from saying goodbye to many people that day so many years ago. There were so many things that had to be explained, and I didn't have all the answers. Theron explained with a firm voice that echoed through the empty halls. Not much else was said between them before the supposed leader and Crystal finally arrived. Once everyone had gathered in the hall and the leader had asked what Theron wanted with them, the old man took his time to scan the 3 persons before him, especially Crystal. She seemed older and more wise than last time he saw her, but she also looked weak for a reason. Maybe she'd been through some tough times? There would be time for such questions later on. For now, something else bothered him that was in his initial purpose to come back. Before I began, I need to ask Crystal, what are you two doing here with a company of mercenaries? Why aren't you and Allison in the woods with the pack? Theron had touched a subject Allie knew Chris wanted to avoid. She didn't mind waiting on her friend to sort things out. She had adapted to the desert fairly well. She actually enjoyed the company of the Crimsons most times. It didn't take much for the desert ruins to feel much like home, more than the forest could at this point. Even so, many assassins had been questioning when they were going home, or at least how they would make Sean pay for his betrayal. They were still waiting for Chris to wake up and do something. Allie knew that she was struggling with ideas of revenge, hanging on to thoughts of what she could have done or should have seen to stop this from happening. It was pointless, and Allie had told her so, but in the end it seemed Chris was going through some strange grieving process of her own. Evan had taunted Sean for not being able to properly kill Chris, and the man had said he wanted her to suffer. And he had got the part just right, no matter how much Chris tried to pretend he hadn't. After a while of dead silence, Allie and Dashton exchanged a look, and Allie extended that look to Chris. Her expression clearly stated that she would handle the questions if Chris wasn't willing to talk, and even though Chris couldn't see it, it was clear that she caught the meaning behind it, because she finally spoke up after that. "A lot can change in 4 years," she stated simply, lifting her head to face the man. "I'll start from the beginning. After a year after you left, my mother died. The exact circumstances of her death is something we don't speak of anymore. The only thing that matters is that she was ill. She had been ill for quite a while. She was probably already ill the last time you saw her." She made a small pause, and after a moment continued. "I took command of the clan and made Evan second. Not so long after that, weeks, maybe a month, Black Pun attacked the White Shadows and New Haven at the same time. That night I decided to leave camp and come here, because I knew that the healers had managed to get away and would come this way. Halfway down the path I was attacked by 3 or 4 assassins that weren't from our camp. I was stabbed and left bleeding on the trail. I was too far away from anything, and even if I had the strength to crawl somewhere, I couldn't reach any kind of help." She fiddled with the katana and for a moment seemed to be lost in thought, and then she carried on. "I would have died there, but Dashton was moving his people back into the desert, and they found me. They carried me here, and one of the healers treated me. I was very close to dying from the blood loss, and I was told my heart stopped a couple of times. I don't remember any of it, though. A month passed, and everyone aside from Dashton's people and the healer thought I was dead. I was kept guarded so that I wouldn't get out of bed, rest, but I managed to escape the camp as soon as I could." She gave a half smile and added, "Now, it was foolish of me to go back knowing I wasn't in perfect health, but I knew that the person who had ordered the hit on me was from the pack, and I had been gone about a month, not knowing what had happened in the meantime. So I went back and exposed the little bastard for what he did, and then he revealed the biggest and baddest secret ever kept by my family," she said, sarcasm clear in her tone for a moment before fading. "He told the clan who my father really was, when my mother so foolishly brought him to the clan. He told them the truth, that what happened that damn night when so many of our people were killed was a consequence of that. Oh yes, of course. The worst part of it, my mother didn't execute you in front of the whole clan like they wanted her to," she stated with a frown. Then she heaved a sigh. "Well, he challenged me for command. I almost defeated him, but I still wasn't well, and all it took was one good hit to bring me down. He would have killed me then, but Allie intervened and managed to get some actives on our side. They followed us here, and we have been here ever since." Allie nodded in agreement. "Evan is here too, although I'm not sure where he's gone. It's been a while since I last spotted him." Not long after Allie said that, the man's voice sounded in the building. "What's going on?" Allie chuckled. Speaking of which," she said, standing up and heading towards where the voice had come from. "I'll be back," she said over her shoulder, walking towards the entrance, and finding Evan rather quickly. She grinned and tilted her head to one side carefully. "You're not allowed in here, you know." Then her expression turned a little more serious as she noticed some drops of blood on the ground. Looking back up, she walked around Evan and noticed a slash on the back of his clothes and cut on his back that seemed to have been caused by a throwing knife. What kind of trouble have you been causing this time?" she asked curiously. "You're bleeding a little bit, don't you know, but the first thing I was told as a recruit was never turn your back on a target. I also suggest you hide that from Chris, at least for a while. She's not in the best of moods." Then she turned towards the hall where the others were gathered and added, "Theron's back. Everyone is this way," she informed casually, beginning to walk back. Assassin's Camp. The active named Eric was lying in his bed, on his stomach, when Sean entered the cabin unannounced. The man had his face buried on his pillow, the wounds on his back covered with bandages. Sean stood for a moment watching the man carefully before pulling a chair to sit next to the bed. "I'm very sorry things had to get to this point," Sean told the man. "But you do see this is your fault, right? I could have you accused of treason for letting that traitor sit beside you while you violated the clan rules." Eric simply nodded in agreement. It had been his fault. He knew that. If he hadn't been drinking, if he hadn't let his guard down, maybe things would have happened differently. I know that, he mumbled. Won't happen again, sir. Oh, I'm sure it won't, Sheen agreed. As a matter of fact, I know exactly how you can redeem yourself. If you are willing, that is. It's a risky assignment, to say the least. Eric raised his head from the pillow to face his leader. How? What can I do? He asked, visibly eager to make up for his mistakes, even after what he had just been put through. Sean smiled at the man. Good. I'm glad you're willing to take the risk for the clan, but now you should rest. We'll discuss it better in the morning. Leaving the cabin, Sean gathered the active and announced Avius as his new second. He also reinforced the fact that any crimson that crossed the limits of the desert into the forest should be killed on sight. No more warnings. One more thing, Sean added at the end of his instructions. Any of the traitors seen in the territory is to be immediately killed, except Allison. An angered expression darkened his features as he spoke the former instructor's name. I want her brought to me alive, he ordered before dismissing the assassins to their duties. He had a score or two to settle with Allison, especially now. If Evan had attacked his sister because of Allie's recruit, only feared that she paid the price for what he did. Sean would make sure of that. Forest, near the New Haven walls. Lucas waited for the effects of the medicine to decrease a little bit, but as soon as this chance presented itself, he had sneaked out of the White Shadows camp. He still wanted to see the files, but Annie was hard to convince, and he would rather keep her trusting him for whatever odd reason. So first he decided to follow a different lead. He could always come back to the plains if needed. New Haven was better to visit now while things were quiet, or at least appeared quiet. Wandering, distracted through the trees, not minding where he was going, as long as it was in the direction of the city, he only noticed that maybe he had crossed some boundaries when a man approached him. Hey, kid! What are you doing here? The man asked. Luke turned to look and grinned. This man, who looked like some sort of mercenary, believed that he was lost, probably. It was usual for people to assume he was harmless, a scrawny, weak-looking boy who walked around visibly unarmed. That threat could be possibly posed to an armed warrior? Whose encampment is this? Lucas asked, still grinning, as if he had just been offered a huge bag of treats. I asked you a question first, boy. Why are you here? The man retorted, now letting one hand rest on the hilt of his sword. Lucas tilted his head to the side in curiosity. I'm passing through. Not that it's any of your business. Now, tell me the truth. Whose encampment is this? This is the Salamander's encampment, the man responded immediately, eyes widening in shock as he realized he had no choice but to tell the young intruder the truth. Salamanders? Lucas scratched his head. Huh, never heard of it, he mumbled, thinking over the information. Hey, freeze, he ordered as he caught sight of the mercenary drawing his sword. He turned his attention to the man fully, letting out a slightly psychotic giggle as the man was now unable to move. Now, Lucas said with a small chuckle. You had to go and do that? I thought we were just chatting, getting to know each other. No pointy objects involved. But, if you insist... He started, snatching the sword off the man's hand and examining it carefully. I can take time off my busy schedule and maybe play for a minute or two. Even 3, if you last that long. He looked at the man's eyes and could see that he was probably desperately trying to move. It won't work. Doesn't matter how hard you try. You'll only be free again if I allow it. He shrugged. I might. And then I might not, he said, tapping his chin and pretending to think about it. Decisions, he chanted cheerfully, pressing the tip of the blade against the man's cheek. After another second, he slid the blade down his face, grazing his skin, but not just breaking it. I'm in a good mood. You have amused me, so I suppose I'll let you live, he stated, putting the man's sword back in its sheath before grabbing him by the collar. He turned the man's face to his, and staring him in the eyes, he erased any memory of the encounter. Once done, he sent the man on his way, waiting a few minutes before continuing to wander into the encampment, whistling to himself. New Haven. The rain still pouring, many people wandered into Lamia's sight. She counted 5 altogether, but there could have been more, each one of the men all looking intently at her as if she was some sort of goddess. It was truly a blessing to be so stunning. One of the men walked around to her back, and so she brought her arms within her cloak as to not give away an attack, if she was so inclined to do so. She didn't expect that to happen, though. She wasn't in the right mood for a bloodbath. And besides, for the time being, she needed these worthless people. "And who is today's visitor?" said the woman, who she knew to be the Black Knight's captain. Thankfully, the Black Knight captain could not say the same about Lamia. Lamia walked up closer to the queen, standing about 10 meters away. With each step, the air grew thicker, and the rain seemed to pour harder. That's when the man, dressed in the foolish-looking white knight costume, stepped in front of the vixen's path. She simply moved her hand across the tall man's chin as she gracefully walked past him until she was but feet away from the queen. "My name is Yishka Vadori, serving girl and messenger to the king of Black Pond. I've been asked by the noble, King Richard, to discuss some very important matters that pertain to the wolf pack. We have some information that we wish to share with you, if you could pleasure me with that time." Lamia felt disgusted just for saying it. To be so nice was such a chore for her. "Noble gentleman," she pointed to the man who had walked behind her and held out her hand. "If you may escort me to some place more dry, I'd much rather discuss these matters indoors, if you don't mind." Just outside New Haven. Yet another day ended, with the ever-so-touchy woman called Morrigan touching Alex. To say that he felt uncomfortable from this would be a lie because of just how often it was being done. He couldn't go a day without her coming up to him at some point and feeling around his body like it was some play toy. Maybe he was just a little annoyed this time. "So tell me, Alex, oh mighty strategist, will you tell me about this Thomas and this Mageria? Will they taste good? I've been wanting to add some pounds to my belly, and that white knight was sure a handsome dish. His throat would be so beautiful if someone would just trim it correctly." Alex smiled while contemplating whether or not to light another cigarette. "You know, sometimes I just wish I could drown you. And I'm not so sure if Grimm would really like that so much. He's most likely to be left without his great strategist," he said with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Despite the fact that he didn't like the knights all that much, he did have a certain respect for them. It was something that he couldn't really explain to anyone. There was a certain level of respect for the people who were in that line of duty that one could not contest. As a matter of fact, he would bet his life on the fact that the men and women of the order would save his life at any date. If Grimm was willing to trust him, then he was sure that the others would too. From what I've learned, Thomas is a quiet fellow. He seems to like to keep to himself. I'm surprised he even came to the camp. As for Mageria, I'm not sure if the two of you would get along. I know I wouldn't get along with the woman." He pushed himself away from Morrigan and tried to stay closer to the campfire, which was now almost dead from the rain. He hoped that it would soon let up so he could start a better fire. For now, he was stuck with the rain, but even worse, he was stuck with Morrigan. The desert. It didn't take long for someone to show up in the long hall in the temple. He was glad that it was a familiar face at least, and not one of someone who would probably be more than happy to kick him out. Instead, he just got a stern look and an extremely brief lecture about how he wasn't supposed to be there. Then she mentioned the blood. "What blood?" he said, feeling his back where he could feel a gash. "Thanks. It hurts now." He struggled for a moment through the pain he now felt. He took the scarf that he wore around his neck from his disguise and wrapped it around his waist like a belt covering the wound that Allie suggested he hide from Crystal, whom he assumed was somewhere within the temple itself. As he was about to walk away, not at all curious really of what might be going on in the temple anymore, he heard his name. A name he honestly hoped never to hear again in his life. Theron was back, but that didn't necessarily mean that he was happy to hear it. After all these years of him just completely disappearing from Valcrest, what could have been different if he had never left? Maybe things between New Haven and the pack would have been solved a lot quicker. Just wouldn't have had to betray Jake would not have had to betray the pack, and maybe, just maybe, Sean would have been afraid to take the attempt on Chris's life. He rushed past Allison, who was just at the door when he assumed Theron was. He pushed her out of the way and slammed the door open, almost breaking the door off its hinges. For the moment, there was just silence. Evan looked at the masked man, knowing well who he was, if he even knew what he was anymore. It would probably be considered a miracle. Then Evan spoke. "Who the hell do you think you are?" New Haven. Marjorie kept her expression still, but there was no way that the woman standing before her was a simple serving girl. No one who cultivated their looks into a weapon the way that she did could be anything less than extremely dangerous. If it was up to her, she would turn the woman away right then and there. But it wasn't up to her. She took one step forward and to the side when the other woman moved, instinctively standing so that she particularly shielded Ella from attack. "My lady?" she murmured over her shoulder, using a seldom-used form of address. "It's up to you." With one hand she signaled everyone else in the courtyard to halt, until Aya made up her mind, and noted to herself that she needed to enlist more women, judging from the stunned looks of some of her people's faces. The desert. Flashback. Birds sat in their trees and sang their morning song together with their fellow friends and loved ones. The small summer breeze made its way through the forest as a deer jumped down a small hill and continued onwards to find a place of rest and eat in peace. Maybe that's everything a human being is looking for as well. A place where they can both rest from the fires of war and eat food while thinking about better times. Maybe that's what most people wanted, but Theron was not one of them. He had no reason to want the war to stop, for it had not done anything to harm him so far. Sure, he was always thinking about better times, but he knew that by the time peace came, he would long be gone, and remembered either as the villain or as the hero. All he wished for was to be remembered for what he did, and not for what he said. Turning his back towards the beautiful sight before him, Theron Lockwood, a 16-year-old boy who was part of a group of hunters, walked down the hill before him. This group he was a part of didn't hunt animals. They hunted assassins. They were called the Wolf Hunters, for the very fact that they hunted assassins from the clan which was named the Wolf Pack. The reason why? Revenge. Revenge. Everyone from the group of hunters had lost someone or something to the assassins' cruel slaughtering. Sarah, the leader of the group, had lost her entire family over a period of 5 years. Gerald, the instructor of the group, had lost his daughter and his beloved wife to those bastards when they tried to kill him. Joanna, the cook, and the scout for the group had lost her 2 twin sons to the assassins and still had a hard time accepting it. Sebastian, Kyle, wolf hunters, were both brothers, and both had lost their older sister to one of the wolves. And then there was Theron, a wolf hunter, who lost his father and his home to the assassins, a sad group of people who worked with their fear and anger for the wolf pack to destroy them, one by one or several at once. After reaching normal ground again, Theron turned towards the man standing amongst the shadows the forest provided for him. A smile crossed the teenager's face as he nodded towards the man amongst the shadows. Out from them, Sebastian Rivers, a 14-year-old boy who were both a wolf hunter and Theron's only friend, stepped out. They nodded slightly at each other as Sebastian walked up to his best friend. "Nice to see you, brother," Sebastian said to the boy, as the boys grabbed each other's right arm and shocked them once before releasing their grip of each other. Their very own little way of saying hello. "You too, brother." "Still going after the girl?" Theron responded with his dark voice, just as he saw another figure enter their area, Gerald, and he was heading straight at them. "Oh, joy of joys, here comes the drill master himself. I bet he's going to ask me to go through that awful complicated plan he made up for me," Sebastian said, and laughed at himself a bit. A rare smile crossed Theron's feature before it faded. "I better go. But remember to not be too late for dinner later. I heard from Kyle that Joanna is planning something good if you succeed," Theron said as he wandered off. "Oh, and remember, come back with your knife covered in blood, or don't come back at all." he sighed as they both laughed before Lockwood finally turned his back on Sebastian. That was the last time he saw his friend when he was still a part of the wolf hunters. Reality. In the desert, Bright Vale, the temple. The flashback had come so sudden, the moment Crystal showered all those terrible news upon Theron's mind. Everything seemed so hopeless, and much of that which had been now lay all in ruins of the past. However, one thing kept repeating itself in his thoughts. Donnie was dead. She was dead, and she would never see what he had become, what she helped create. A rush of feelings raced through his entire body as another flashback came into his view, the moment Allison left the room to find Evan. Theron had turned his back towards Crystal and Dashian. Flashback. The warm rays of sun was moving upwards over the forest as dawn was upon them. It was a beautiful morning, and the camp was full of life. The workers were already up and jumping, most of the actives were still eating breakfast, and some of them were training with their instructors. Allison had left 1 or 2 days ago for the White Shadows encampment. He had never had the chance to say goodbye to her, nor let her in on his plans to leave. Crystal was training some actives, and Evan were nowhere to be found at the moment. However, his goal was not to speak with either one of these people just yet. He wanted to speak with Daniela first. Theron Lockwood, a 43-year-old assassin, walked through the wolf-pack camp, and as he reached the cabin he was looking for, he knocked once and then twice before someone told him to come in. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Before him sat Daniela, the leader of the wolf-pack. Both of them had once been each other's nemesis, but today they faced each other as friends, for things had changed over a couple of months. And Danny nodded towards a chair not too far away from where she sat, and Theron bowed slightly and sat down. "I'm guessing you want something," Danny said, and faced Theron where he sat. "You're good," Theron said, and they both laughed a bit. "I try to keep up, just like everyone else." "Ah, yes. Well, you're right. I have something I want to ask you." Theron began and turned serious in a heartbeat. "Go on, my friend," she said, and as she spoke, Theron looked out the open window and faced the little sunlight that shone in from the rising sun on the horizon. His heart was heavy, and he still had so much to say and do in this land before all of this, but there was simply no time left for it. I would like to ask you to revoke my oath to the clan and let me go," he explained shortly, and stared into Daniela's bright blue eyes. She stared back with a surprised look. "Why this sudden urge to leave us? I thought you had started to get comfortable with the idea of living with us," she said, as if it was a joke, but her voice was serious. Lockwood looked out of the window once more and stood up. He walked over to it and closed the window before sitting down in his chair again. He faced Danny once more. "It's not that I don't enjoy what I got, but my life is not here. It was Sebastian's life. It would have been his brother's life as well, but fate's designs are not always so predictable. I don't belong here anymore. My life is out there, in the unknown wastes of another land, staring death into the eye, and protecting Valcrest from any outside forces. That is my destiny," Theron explained, and a smile actually showed itself on his face. There was a long moment of silence before them as Danny looked around the cabin. So many memories were stored in here, and more would be stored there in the future, once she was gone. Her gaze returned to Theron. "I see," she said, seeming a bit untouched by this sudden news. However, Theron knew that she was affected by his will to leave. She just didn't want to show it to him. After that they spoke from dawn to dusk about everything. Literally. They spoke about old memories, about Sarah, about the wolf hunters, how Theron and Sebastian had met and become friends, how Danny and Sebastian had married. They spoke about things yet to come, how Valcrest might look like once the war is over, what the assassins would do once the war was over, what really awaited them in the afterlife. Many deep things were discussed in that cabin between dawn and dusk before Theron finally decided that it was time to leave. As he walked out of the cabin, Danny explained that he would probably meet Evan on the way, and it would be wise if he could make him follow him to New Haven at least. She also asked that he would not reveal that he was leaving Valcrest to Evan, because that would only make things even harder. "Will you ever return?" was the last thing she asked of him as he started to walk away from the cabin towards the forest. He turned around and said, "I will return when I deem it right to do so. However, know this, I will return one day, no matter what. It was the last thing he said to Danny before disappearing into the dark forest. Crystal, who had heard the last part between them, walked up to her mother's side and looked first at Theron as he faded away in the shadows, and then on her mother. "Where is he going?" she asked. "To face his destiny." Reality. Theron gasped for air through the mask as his mind returned to reality once more. The rest of emotions kept sweeping over him, and soon something bad would happen. All these good and horrible memories that he had been suppressing came back to him all at once, creating a blast of power within him that crushed all his emotional barriers and mental ones as he spoke. The thing that made him fall over the edge was when he felt the presence of a familiar person entering the room. Evan spoke. "Who the hell do you think you are?" And that's when it all happened at once. Theron screamed with both fear, sadness, anger, and frustration, and all the other emotions at once as he slammed his right fist into a nearby wall. A large shockwave burst out from the point he had hit, and it made the entire ground beneath them shake violently. He had created an earthquake that made the entire temple shake before the shockwave moved on to shake the entire ruins of Brightvale. Some small buildings crumbled where others were close to leveling to the ground. Soon enough, the shockwave left the ruins and continued on until it finally faded away. Theron didn't know how far a shockwave had gone, but he knew that anyone who had once known him and his powers and had felt that would now know that he was back. Theron calmed down and sat down on one of the rocks as he pushed his concealed face in his hands. "No, no, no," he whispered as he vented his sorrow. He didn't cry, but he was sad nonetheless. He had made a promise to Sebastian that he would protect his best friend's daughter and wife, and he had failed to do so. Sebastian's wife was dead, and his daughter was on the brink of giving up hope from what he had understood. It took him some time to get his composure back as he stood up and faced Evan and the rest of them. "Who am I?" he began, and his voice was grim to say the least. "I am Theron Lockwood." And with that, the master assassin left the room, ignoring anything Evan or the rest said. He had a job to do, and he would not stop to listen to reason just yet. Theron began to make his way out from the temple, and once past the crowd, he proceeded towards the dungeons where he had once been kept locked up by the crazed cult. Time was of the essence. He had a book to find.